Davante Adams has been making headlines lately, taking shots at the Las Vegas Raiders during various podcasts. We'll dive into what he said a bit later, but right now, let's focus on a player who's getting a second chance to shine, rookie running back Dylan Laube. Many of us are excited to see what he can do, and I believe he has a lot of potential. Dylan Laube is a rookie, and he didn't come from a big football school like Georgia or Alabama. Because of this, I think his best performances will come as he gains experience in his second and third years. That's when the game starts to slow down for players. Laube is getting another opportunity to play against the Denver Broncos because the Raiders are missing two key players in his position. Both Alexander Mattison and Zamir White are likely out for this game, which means Laube will have a chance to step up. Amir Abdullah is expected to start, but I've heard that Laube will get about 40% of the running back touches and snaps. Historically, Amir Abdullah has been the third down back, but now he's stepping into the lead role. I think we'll see a rotation between the two. For example, Abdullah might handle the first two drives, and then Laube will come in for the third. If there's a 2-minute situation, Abdullah might return to the field, but Laube could start the second half. I'm really excited for Dylan Laube because he has a lot of upside. However, we did see some struggles during the preseason and in his only carry this season against the Pittsburgh Steelers, where he fumbled the ball. Fumbling is a big concern for any running back. If a player can't hold onto the football, it's hard for them to stay on the field. It's important to remember that coming from a smaller school means Laube might not have faced the same level of competition. The speed and strength of the game can be overwhelming at first. Players are quicker, and they can knock the ball out more easily. But now, as we enter the second half of the season, Laube should start to feel more comfortable. This is when he can really show what he's capable of. A new opportunity with Scott Turner. We also need to recognize that Dylan Laube is stepping into a new situation. Previously, Luke Getsy was the one calling the plays, but now it's Scott Turner taking the reins. This change could make a big difference for Laube. One thing I think people often overlook is how the Raiders used Laube in the past. Many of his runs were for just 1, 2, or 3 yards, and a lot of those plays were power runs. The Raiders kept running ISO and duo plays with him, which didn't seem like the right fit. Those plays ask a running back to run between the tackles, but Laube is better suited for running toward the sidelines. In fact, his two best runs this season were both outside zone runs. One was an 8-yard gain against the San Francisco 49ers, and the other was against the Minnesota Vikings. Zone runs are all about vision, finding the gap and hitting it quickly. In contrast, power runs rely more on following your blockers. I believe Laube shines in a zone running scheme. Under Luke Getsy, it felt like he didn't tailor plays to the players on the field. For instance, he would call zone runs for Zamir White and power runs for Alexander Mattison without considering their strengths. This approach didn't help the team. However, Scott Turner has already shown that he's different. In his first game, he made sure to put his running backs in the best position to succeed. When Zamir White was on the field, most of his 5 carries were power-based plays. But when Mattison was in, it was mostly zone runs. This shows that Turner is willing to adapt his play calling based on who is in the game. With Dylan Laube getting this new opportunity, I'm excited to see what he can do. There's still a lot of potential in him, even though some fans may have lost faith after his fumble against the Steelers. That was his only carry this season, and he hasn't played since then. For the Raiders, it's time to give these young players a chance. They invested a draft pick in Laube, so he deserves to get some carries and opportunities against the Denver Broncos. Let's hope he can show what he's capable of. Facing a tough challenge. The Broncos have a really strong defense, so it won't be easy for the Raiders. However, I believe the Raiders' offensive line can find success against them. This will be the second week in a row that Scott Turner is calling the plays, and Joe Philbin will continue coaching the offensive line. We'll have the same unit on the field again, with Jordan M. at one guard position, Dylan Parham at the other, and Paris Johnson at center. Glaze Miller has also looked impressive. Both Paris Johnson and Miller have been performing well, so I'm optimistic about our chances against the Denver Broncos this week. I'm excited to see what Dylan Laube can do and how the Raiders will progress. Now there's another topic we need to discuss, and honestly, I'm tired of bringing it up. It's about Davante Adams. I've reached my limit with him. When the Raiders traded for Davante Adams, I understood his excitement. He thought he was joining the Raiders to be closer to family and play with a quarterback he liked, along with an offensive coordinator he believed in. However, I think he quickly realized how different it is to play with Aaron Rodgers compared to most quarterbacks in the NFL. It seems like he regretted his decision soon after. He tried to make it work with the Raiders, but things just kept getting worse. He wanted to have success in his career and thought that joining the Jets could turn things around for him. But now, he's been going on every radio show and podcast, taking shots at the Raiders repeatedly. I just don't understand why he keeps doing this. It feels unnecessary. I want you all to listen to some of what he said on one of these podcasts, and then we'll discuss it further. There are a lot of narratives out there, especially on Twitter, where people are saying things like, Aaron's done, or Davante's not a Jet next year. What do you think about all this? Let's talk about it. Davante Adams speaks out. In a recent interview, Davante Adams shared what's on his mind right now. He mentioned that his main focus is on packing car seats for a trip, not on what might happen next season. He's not thinking about next year. He's just trying to get a few more wins before the season ends. He even joked that if someone had bet him $1 million, he would have taken it, believing they wouldn't only have one win at this point. Adams knows that football is a tough sport, and he's aware that people are talking about whether he made the right choice by leaving the Raiders. He mentioned that some people tease him about his performance, noting that he hasn't had many games with over 100 yards. But he insists that the outside chatter doesn't bother him. He doesn't pay attention to what people say or write about him. He explained that even if people think he's the best player, it doesn't change how he plays. Right now, he's focused on making the most of this season, regardless of whether leaving the Raiders was the right decision for him. He feels that coming to his new team has been a positive change, even if they haven't won as many games as they hoped. Adams reflected on his time in Las Vegas, saying that he started to feel less confident about his contributions week after week. There were games where he only had 40 yards, and while he didn't make big stats, he still felt hopeful going into games. He believes that with the potential of his new offense, they can perform well. He emphasized that he's working with people he trusts and that he can still play at a high level. The key now is to execute better and be more consistent. Ultimately, Adams wants to convey that he doesn't regret his decision to leave the Raiders. He believes it was right for him. Davante Adams' situation and Mark Davis's ownership changes. What Davante Adams is trying to say is that he doesn't regret his decision to leave the Raiders. He feels hopeful about his current situation and believes he can put up good numbers with his new team. He wants to show that he can perform well statistically. However, it's worth noting that the Jets aren't winning any more games than the Raiders this season. When the Jets traded for Davante, I thought he could spark some success for them. Unfortunately, they've only won one game since he joined. It seems that Davante's presence hasn't changed much for the Jets. His performance was already declining while he was with the Raiders, and with Aaron Rodgers' injury, he's not the same player he used to be. Both the Jets and the Raiders are struggling right now, yet Davante keeps going on shows and insisting that he's in a better place now. But in reality, both teams are in similar situations, so it doesn't make sense for him to keep saying he felt helpless and hopeless with the Raiders. I have a lot of respect for Derek Carr. When he left the Raiders, it wasn't a pretty split, but he never spoke badly about the team. Even during tough times, like when Josh McDaniels was coaching, Carr stayed respectful. I hope Davante realizes that he's losing support from Raider fans with his constant criticism. Now let's shift gears and talk about Mark Davis. Recently, he sold 15% of the Raiders' ownership, which is surprising. He had already sold 10.5% to Richard Seymour, Tom Brady, and Brady's business partner. Now he's selling another 15% to two new investors. I'm curious about why Mark Davis is selling this additional 15%. It seems strange, especially since he moved the team to Las Vegas, where he should be making more money. What's the reason behind these ownership changes? It's something to think about. Mark Davis and the future of the Raiders. Mark Davis doesn't need to keep selling parts of the team to raise cash, as that strategy can only work for so long. Eventually, he could sell all his shares of the Las Vegas Raiders, which would be surprising. There are two main possibilities here. Mark Davis is ready to move on. If he no longer wants to be part of the Raiders franchise, that would be shocking to many fans. The Raiders are planning big moves. With over $100 million in cap space, maybe they're looking to make a major splash this offseason. For example, if they want to sign a player like Christian Wilkins to a big contract, say $100 million with $70 million guaranteed, Mark Davis would need to put that cash up front. The NFL holds that money in trust until it's paid out to the player. There could be several targets in mind, like T. Higgins, or even a quarterback. If the Raiders decide to pay a quarterback $30 million, it shows they're serious about making changes. It's strange that Mark Davis has sold 25% of the team in just 6 months. This new sale will be voted on in about 3 weeks. If approved, it will mean he's sold a significant portion of the Raiders in a short time. It's also interesting to note that Mark Davis has never owned 100% of the Raiders. There have always been other partners involved, so why is he selling now? Is he done with the Raiders, or is he trying to raise cash for the offseason? Remember, the Raiders have several free agents to re-sign, like Trayvon Mullen, Nate Hobbs, and Malcolm Kuntz. Those contracts will cost money too. And what about all the money the Raiders have been making? Where is that cash going? For instance, when Mark Davis sold 10% to Tom Brady and his business partner, what happened to that money? I hope the Raiders aren't putting themselves in a tough spot financially, especially when it comes to signing key free agents. There was a rumor that Andy Reid received a $100 million contract for 5 years. If that's the case, how much would a highly sought-after coach like Ben Johnson want? He could easily ask for $12 million or more to join the Raiders. It's also worth mentioning that the Raiders previously didn't hire Cliff Kingsbury because they didn't have the funds to pay him. This was surprising, as an offensive coordinator typically earns between $1 million and $2 million. Not a huge amount. Mark Davis selling such a large portion of his ownership raises a lot of questions. We'll have to wait and see what happens next. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to give a thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you next time with another video.